Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about Esper control in Standard. We're going to talk about card choices in the deck, what the point of the whole deck is, and how to play the deck. Let's jump into it. So this is my Esper control deck. I'm just going to go through each one of the cards, what they're used for, why we're, playing certain things. But this is a pretty traditional control deck. It has a lot of kill spells, a lot of removal spells, and a lot of card advantage, including board wipes, and finishers that also can help control the game, which is exactly what we want. Just give me just a second. I'm going to put things in different categories to make things easier to talk about. So I divided these into categories of things that do similar things to each other, just to make it easier. And let's talk about each one of the categories. As far as the lands go, it's just plays Esper lands, which is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to talk about. Although we play one of Aganjo, one of Otawara, which is really good. We don't play the Takenuma because the only thing we can get back is Wandering Emperor, and that is like pretty rare, so there's no point in playing that. And we're playing 2 Mirax just as something to dump our mana into if we want to after leaving mana up with a counterspell. And this first category is removal. So after things resolve, if they get in under our counterspells, which we're going to talk about in just a second, it's important to be able to remove them. And in a reasonably diverse format like Standard, it's really important that we have a bunch of really diverse types of removal, and then we can kind of shore things up with the sideboard. So we're playing 3 Cut Down with the 4th one in the sideboard. Cut Down is mostly for really aggressive creatures, mono red, Esper Legends, even the mono black deck. Cut Down's pretty strong against. And being 1 mana, we can untap and then leave counter magic up. To Go for the Throat, just as really solid removal. There's not a ton of artifact decks anymore, so it's often 2 mana unconditional removal. We're playing 2 Shieldred's Edict. Shieldred's Edict is either really bad or really powerful. It's really powerful because you can kind of select what you want to get rid of, especially in instant speed. Getting rid of a Planeswalker is really strong, but really bad when they're going super wide. And Void Red, which is 3 mana, can't be countered, destroy non-land permanent. Having this unconditional removal is extremely powerful. So that's our removal. As far as our counterspell suite, we kind of treat it like removal. It's important to have a bunch of different stuff to be able to deal with a bunch of different things. One thing that we go with the full playset on is Make Disappear. This is a slightly worse mana leak. In most situations, 2 mana, counter target spell, unless the controller pays 2, and has Casualty 1, where we can sacrifice a creature when we cast it and kind of copy it. So really, it can become counter target spell unless the controller pays 4. Really, the only creatures we have in our deck, at least in the main deck, is the Wandering Emperor tokens. So if we have Wandering Emperor, Make Disappear up, nothing's really resolving, really. And then one of 3 other counter spells, Negate for these non-creature spells, Disdainful Stroke for things that cost 4 or greater, like the ramp deck and things like that, and a Dissipate, just as unconditional counter magic and being able to exile counter magic. And again, it's important that in the main deck, we kind of spread out what our answers are and then really shore things up in the sideboard so they aren't just dead to certain strategies. This next category, we have our card advantage. We're going to start with our playset of it. Memory Deluge is our primary card advantage, 4 mana instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order, and has flashback for 7. So you cast it for the first time at instant speed. Remember, you can leave counter magic or removal up when you attempt to cast this. At instant speed, look at the top 4 cards, put 2 into your hand, and then you flash it back. Look at the top 7 cards, put 2 into your hand. It's extremely powerful, mostly because it's instant speed, right? We can leave all this stuff up and cast Memory Deluge if they don't do anything relevant. We're playing 2 Siphon Insight. Siphon Insight's kind of an interesting card. Again, it's instant, so we can leave stuff up, which is all very important. We play instant speed. Look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down and put the other on the bottom of that library. You may look at and play the exiled card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast a spell and flashback for 3. So really good against these grindy strategies or really any deck that has stuff that you'd want to cast. But again, card advantage, even if it's cards from your opponent's deck. And we're playing one of the Celestus. It's a 3 mana legendary artifact. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as the Celestus enters the battlefield. And you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, so it's reasonable ramp. And you can pay 3 mana to tap it, where if it's night, it becomes day. Otherwise, it becomes night, to just switch between day and night, and activate only as a sorcery. And it says, whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain 1 life. You may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So this might not be card advantage, but it's definitely card selection. And we can manipulate day and night to sort of stop our opponents from doing interesting things. Mostly with Graveyard Trespasser is really the only card that is often played that cares about day and night. But it's just another way that we can really reliably filter our hand, which we love. And gaining life is sweet too. We're playing 5 board wipes, 3 Sunfall, and 2 Farewell. Sunfall, exile all creatures, incubate X, where X is the number of creatures exiled this way. I guess that's another way to get creatures who make disappear now that I think about it. But this is just a exiling all creatures, means we don't have to worry about stuff. Everything's gone. We get to reset for 5 mana. That's great. And then Farewell is a true reset. We can choose one or more, exile all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or graveyards for 6 mana. Just a true reset of everything but planeswalkers. And playing this big suite is really important when things really get in underneath our removal and underneath our counter magic, and we just like really need to remove the board. These board wipes are super important. As far as our finishers go, the big ways that we're going to be finishing, at least in the main deck with this deck, are with Mirex, with the tokens from Sunfall, or with the Wandering Emperor tokens. Wandering Emperor is an awesome planeswalker. Again, it has flash, so we can play it at instant speed, so we can leave all this stuff up and cast Wandering Emperor when we want to, similar to Memory Delusion, all those things. It has 4 mana, planeswalker with 3 loyalty. When it enters the battlefield this turn, you can activate your loyalty abilities anytime you can cast an instant, which means you can cast it on your opponent's turn and immediately activate an ability. +1 is put a +1/+1 counter up to 1 target creature against first strike till end of turn. -1 is create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance, and its -2 is exile target tapped creature, you gain 2 life. So very often when you're casting Wandering Emperor, 99% of the time is during combat. If you want to get rid of something that has toughness over 2, you're just going to do its -2 to exile the tap creature because it just attacked, and then untap, you know, do your thing with the, now you have a planeswalker, you know, and all of that stuff. If it has toughness 2 or less, often you'll be just making a samurai and blocking with a samurai so that we can preserve a loyalty counter, so we can untap and make another samurai and just like trade in combat. And if we already have a creature, very often we'll be putting a counter on it, so let it gain first strike till end of turn, just to win that combat. Really, the Wandering Emperor is very good because, again, it can leave all of these things up, and it's very often a removal spell, untap, now I have a planeswalker, and it's how we're going to finish. We're going to finish slow and steady with those 2/2s. We're playing a 1 of Sunset Revelry. Sunset Revelry is kind of an interesting card. I don't think it's ever bad, but it's 2 mana sorcery. If an opponent has more life than you, you gain 4 life. If an opponent controls more creatures than you, create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens. And if an opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw a card. I like playing this as a 1 of in the main deck, mostly because, you know, I like these main deck sideboard cards, especially when we have a lot of card selection with like Memory Delusion, things like that. But also I think of this card as like a timely reinforcements. The way this deck gets beaten is to just go underneath it, I think is the best way to beat this deck. And Sunset Revelry being able to gain 4 life and create 2 humans and then sometimes draw a card, it really shores up those aggressive matchups, which we love. Speaking of that, our sideboard is Sunset Revelry. Again, this is for these aggressive matchups. We think of it as like a slightly worse timely reinforcements, or maybe slightly better if you like drawing cards. We're playing Temporary Lockdown, again, for these aggressive matchups that play a lot of permanents that cost 2 or less. That feels like that's pretty straightforward. Disdainful Stroke, we've already talked about because we play 1 in the main deck. If we have things that cost 4 or greater, we care about. Negate, non-creature spells we care about, especially in mirror matches. Chromehost Seedshark is a really interesting card. Is a 3 mana 2/4 with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, incubate X, where X is that spell's mana value. So Chromehost Seedshark I actually really like in super grindy matchups, especially against control, but really anything super grindy. There are some situations where I might bring this in against like an aggressive matchup just as a 2/4 for 3, but really what we're trying to do is, like, if we stick this, especially stick it in the late game when we have mana and able to do other stuff, we then can create multiple creatures from casting our non-creature spells, which is just so powerful. That's why I like it in these grindy matchups. Cut Down is for these aggressive matchups. Again, one of the main ways that we lose is aggressive matchups, which is why we have a lot of stuff in our sideboard for that. Duress for, again, a similar matchup you'd bring in Negate against, you know, to deal with these non-creature spells. Shieldred is for decks that don't have a lot of removal in them, or for aggressive matchups. So if you slam a Shieldred against like mono red, the game is just over. But you really don't want to be spending 4 mana against a deck that is just going to like go for the throat your Shieldred, untap, like do their thing. That's not what you want to do. You want to be siding Shieldred against decks that like it just wins against, like mono red, or, you know, very good against like the Soldier's deck and stuff like that, or against decks that you might run out of threats against, like the mirror match. In Siphon Insight, we side in against decks that we think are going to go long. Decks that it's really important we get large card advantages, and normally against decks that are going to go really long have a lot of juicy stuff in our opponent's deck that we can grab. So we bring in the extra Siphon Insights for extra card advantage, especially in the early game against these decks like mono black or other mid-range decks or even control decks and stuff like that, to allow us to get that little bit extra card advantage just for 2 mana. But all in all, this is by and large a very traditional Esper control deck. It removes stuff, it counters stuff, and it kills with a planeswalker. Like, what more could you want? And you play it like a traditional control deck. You decide if things are relevant when your opponents cast them, and then you either deal with them with counter magic or removal spells. And then once everything is all stabilized, after you've cast a board wipe or two or whatever, you've drawn a bunch of cards with like Memory Deluge and whatever, you cast your Wandering Emperor, or you make your incubation token with the Sunfall, an actual creature, and you win. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.